John Matthews straightened his tie in the rearview mirror, a father's pride swelling in his chest. His daughter's wedding day had finally arrived, a celebration he'd spent months helping plan and tens of thousands funding. Approaching the venue's security gate, John smiled. "Good afternoon, father of the bride." The guard glanced at his tablet, face falling. "Sir, I'm sorry, but—" He turned the screen, revealing a photo of John with bold red text, "Do not admit." "There must be a mistake," John said, voice steady, despite the sudden hollow feeling in his chest. "The family was clear, sir." The guard avoided eye contact. "They said it was a mutual decision to avoid conflict." John stood frozen, staring past the gate at the flower-laden archway he'd paid for just last week, where his daughter would soon walk without him. He'd written every check, but couldn't buy his way in. "And with this final payment, Mr. Matthews, everything for your daughter's wedding is covered in full." The event coordinator, Melissa, slid the receipt across her polished desk with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. John Matthews signed with a flourish, his face brightening as he handed over the check. $22,000, worth every penny for Emily's special day. "That brings your total contribution to just over $48,000, Melissa noted, glancing at her computer. "Most fathers share these expenses with the couple or the bride's mother." John waved dismissively. "Emily's my only daughter. I told her not to worry about a thing." Melissa organized the wedding folder, her professional demeanor intact, but eyes curious. "Will you be giving the toast at the reception?" "I don't believe I've seen you at any of the planning meetings with Emily and her fiancé." A flicker of something, disappointment perhaps, crossed John's face. Emily and Jason preferred handling the details themselves. "But I'm looking forward to the father-daughter dance." Melissa nodded, but her expression had shifted to one of subtle concern. "Is everything all right?" John asked. "Of course," she replied too quickly. "It's just unusual for someone so generous to be so uninvolved in the planning." John pocketed his receipt, his smile unwavering though something tightened in his chest. "Well, that's modern parenting for you. Give them wings to fly, right?" As he left the office, John checked his phone. Still no reply to his 3 messages to Emily about tomorrow's rehearsal dinner. Morning light filtered through John's bedroom window as he meticulously straightened his tie. Navy blue with subtle silver accents, purchased specifically to complement Emily's wedding colors. On his dresser sat the photograph that had guided him through the darkest days of single parenthood. 8-year-old Emily on his shoulders at the county fair, both of them laughing under summer skies. "You'd be proud of her, Margaret," he whispered to his late wife's memory, touching the picture frame. "Our little girl getting married." John checked his phone again, a habit that had intensified over the past week. The group chat with Emily and her fiancé Jason remained stubbornly quiet despite his messages about arrival times and offers to help with last-minute details. "They're busy," he told himself, slipping the father of the bride speech from his jacket pocket to review one last time. He'd spent weeks crafting it, balancing humor with heartfelt wisdom about marriage gleaned from 18 years with Margaret. His finger hovered over Emily's contact information. After 3 unanswered calls yesterday, he hesitated to try again. Instead, he texted, "Heading to the venue soon. Can't wait to see you, sweetheart." The message sent, then sat alone in the conversation thread. John adjusted his boutonniere, the same white rose variety he'd ordered for the bridal party. He checked his watch, a gift from Emily on his 50th birthday, though she'd been absent at the small celebration dinner. He'd long stopped mentioning these small disappointments to friends. "Today will be different," he assured himself, gathering his keys. "Today is special." The Rosewood estate looked exactly as John had imagined when he'd first written the deposit check 6 months ago. White chairs lined the garden pathway, and floral arrangements adorned every surface, arrangements he recognized from the catalog he'd reviewed when doubling the flower budget at Emily's request. He adjusted his cufflinks, a wedding gift from Margaret's father 30 years ago, and approached the security checkpoint with a warm smile. Several guests ahead of him were already being checked in, their names efficiently located on tablets. "Good afternoon," John greeted when his turn came. John Matthews, father of the bride. The security guard, a young man with an earpiece and crisp black uniform, tapped his screen several times. His expression shifted subtly. "Sir, could I see your invitation, please?" "I don't have one," John replied, his smile faltering slightly. "I'm Emily's father, John Matthews." The guard looked uncomfortable now, glancing toward a supervisor stationed near the garden entrance. "One moment, sir." The supervisor approached, tablet in hand. "Is there a problem, Derek?" "This gentleman says he's the father of the bride, but—" Derek's voice trailed off as he tilted his screen toward her. The supervisor's professional mask slipped for just an instant. "Mr. Matthews, I'm afraid there seems to be a situation." She turned her tablet, revealing a photo of John with bold red text superimposed. "Do not admit." John stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. "There's been a mistake." That's my photo, but—" "I'm sorry, sir." Her voice lowered. The instructions came directly from the bride and groom. They indicated it was a family decision to avoid potential conflict. Blood rushed in John's ears as he noticed guests watching the exchange, some whispering behind cupped hands. "Did my daughter say why?" John asked, his voice barely audible. "We weren't given details, sir." The supervisor's professional demeanor returned. "I can call someone from the family if you'd like to." "No," John interrupted, dignity somehow intact despite the heat rising in his face. "That won't be necessary." He stood frozen, watching as more guests filtered past him into the venue he had paid for, where his only daughter would soon walk down the aisle without him. John stumbled back to his car on legs that didn't feel like his own. The parking lot swam before him as wedding guests continued to stream past, some glancing curiously in his direction. Inside the vehicle, he gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened, trying to steady his breathing. This couldn't be happening. There had to be a mistake. His phone felt unnaturally heavy as he pulled it from his pocket. 3 attempts to call Emily went straight to voicemail. "Emily, it's Dad. There's some confusion at the entrance. They're saying I'm not, that I can't." His voice cracked. He ended the call, started again. "Please, call me back immediately." 5 minutes passed. 10. The distant sound of string quartet music drifted across the parking lot, the processional beginning. He'd paid extra for that quartet. John tried Jason next, then Emily's maid of honor, his ex-wife's brother, who he knew was attending. Each call met the same fate, voicemail or no answer. A text message to Emily. "What's happening? Please talk to me." The message showed as delivered, then read. No response came. Through his windshield, John watched the last guests hurry inside. The ceremony was starting. His daughter was walking down the aisle without him. Family decision to avoid conflict. The words echoed in his mind, each repetition a hammer blow. What conflict? When had there ever been conflict? He scrolled through his recent messages to Emily. Polite requests about wedding details, confirmations of payments made, gentle inquiries about his role in the ceremony. The only response is, "Thanks for handling that. We've got it covered. We'll let you know." A notification appeared on his phone. A credit card charge from the florist. Final payment processed. His money was welcome. He was not. John's hands trembled as a strangled sound. Something between a laugh and a sob escaped him. This wasn't the first time, he realized, just the most devastating. "Mr. Matthews." John looked up to see Melissa, the event coordinator, standing beside his car window. He hadn't even noticed her approach. Hastily wiping his eyes, he rolled down the window. "I saw what happened," she said, voice low. "I'm so sorry." "Is there another entrance? Maybe they misunderstood." "They didn't." Melissa glanced back toward the venue. "I shouldn't be out here, but I couldn't just—" "Please," John said. "Tell me what's going on." Melissa shifted uncomfortably. "The ceremony started 10 minutes ago. Your daughter looks beautiful. The groom's father walked her down the aisle." The words hit John like physical blows. "Did Emily say anything? About me?" "Not to me directly, but last night at the rehearsal dinner, which was apparently moved without updating our records, I overheard her telling someone that everything was finally working out perfectly, that the financial situation was handled, but the complication had been resolved." "Complication," John repeated hollowly. "When I asked if you'd be bringing the marriage license as planned, she said her uncle had it now." Melissa looked pained. "Mr. Matthews, I've coordinated over 200 weddings. I've never seen anything like this." John stared past her toward the venue. "And everything's proceeding normally? No issues? They all seem perfectly happy." She hesitated, even relieved. Something hardened in John's chest. "Was anything said about the remaining balances? The reception catering, the band, the midnight send-off?" "No, those are all scheduled as planned." Melissa paused. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," John said quietly. "Thank you for your kindness, Melissa." For the first time that day, a sense of clarity began to replace the shock. John's phone rang an hour later. Jason's mother, his almost-in-law, whom he'd met briefly twice. His finger hovered over the screen before answering. "Hello, Karen." "John." Her voice was tight, controlled. "We have a situation." "Do you?" he responded, surprising himself with his calm tone. "The caterer just informed us they can't serve the reception dinner without final payment. The band is saying the same thing. What's going on with the accounts?" No preamble, no explanation about the ceremony, no acknowledgement of what they'd done. "That's strange," John said. "Did Emily explain why I wasn't allowed to attend her wedding?" A pause. "John, this isn't the time for—" "It's exactly the time, Karen. I just watched security turn me away with a photo specifically prepared to keep me out. I'd like to understand why." Another pause, longer. When she spoke again, her voice was measured. "It was a family decision, John. There were concerns about potential conflict." "What conflict?" "Your relationship with Emily has been complicated. We all agreed this was best for her special day. All of you, including Emily." "Yes." No hesitation. "It was her wedding, her choice." John took a deep breath. "And now there's a problem with the payments. These vendors are threatening to pack up and leave. Emily is in tears. Surely you don't want to ruin her wedding day over a misunderstanding." The word landed like a slap. Misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Karen. It was a deliberate decision. Your words, actions, have consequences. What are you saying? Alarm crept into her voice. I'm saying I've made a decision, too. The remaining vendors won't be paid, not by me. You can't do that. Actually, I can. It was a family decision, John replied, echoing her earlier words, to avoid further conflict. As he ended the call, his hands were finally steady. John sat in his car, phone in hand, the anger and hurt crystallizing into resolve. The vendor contact list from his wedding planning folder lay open on the passenger seat, the same folder Emily had never asked to see. He scrolled to the first number. The catering company. This is John Matthews. I need to cancel the remaining payments for the Matthews-Kendall wedding today. His voice was steady, controlled. Sir? The caterer sounded confused. The reception is scheduled to begin in less than an hour. I understand. I've already paid 60% of the total. The remaining 40% will not be processed. A pause. Mr. Matthews, this is highly irregular. The food is prepared, the staff on site. I'm aware. I'm not asking for a refund of what's been paid, simply canceling the final payment that was scheduled for service completion. Similar conversations followed with the band, the bartending service, and the venue's late-night staff. Some were confused, others immediately grasped the situation. Family issues? The band manager asked knowingly. Something like that, John replied. The lighting company was particularly understanding. We get it, sir. Happens more than you'd think. We'll remove the special effects package, but leave basic lighting so people aren't in the dark. With each call, John's breathing became steadier, his purpose clearer. This wasn't revenge, it was simply the natural consequence of their choice to exclude him. He'd been invited to pay, not to participate. His final call was to his credit card company, placing a hold on any new charges from the venue or associated vendors. Task completed, John put the car in drive and moved to a spot with a clear view of the reception hall. From his vantage point in the parking lot, John watched the reception venue through early evening light. Guests had migrated from the ceremony to cocktail hour on the terrace, champagne glasses glinting in the sun. For nearly an hour, everything appeared normal. Emily and Jason posed for photographs, guests mingled, servers circulated with appetizers. Then came the first sign of disruption. A catering manager emerged from the kitchen door in animated conversation with Jason's father. Their gestures became increasingly agitated before they disappeared inside. 10 minutes later, Karen, Jason's mother from the earlier phone call, joined them, her face tight with concern. One of the bartenders who had been packing up approached John's car, recognizing him from previous planning meetings. Thought that might be you, the young man said, leaning against the car. Quite a situation in there. What's happening? John asked. Management announced we're doing cash bar only since the open bar invoice wasn't paid. Catering saying they'll serve the salads and appetizers already prepped, but the main course is on hold. He gestured to his box of supplies. I've been cut since they're scaling back service. As they spoke, the venue's signature uplighting that should have transformed the reception hall into a warm amber glow remained dark. Through the windows, John could see confused staff members testing switches. The band had set up their equipment but weren't playing. Instead, the lead singer appeared to be arguing with the wedding coordinator. Look, I don't want to get in the middle of family drama, the bartender continued, but whatever happened in there, these folks are freaking out. The bride's in tears, groom's family is making frantic calls, and half the guests are wondering why there's suddenly a cash-only policy at what was supposed to be a premium event. He straightened up. Anyway, I should go. Good luck with whatever this is." As the young man walked away, John saw Emily's uncle, the one now supposedly holding the marriage license, storm out of the venue, phone pressed to his ear. The confrontation came sooner than John expected. As dusk settled, a luxury SUV screeched to a stop beside his car. Emily's Uncle David, his former brother-in-law, jumped out, followed by Jason's father. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" David slammed his hand on John's hood. "Fix this now." John stepped out calmly. "Hello, David. Lovely ceremony?" "Don't play games," Jason's father interjected. "Emily is devastated. The reception is falling apart." "That's unfortunate," John replied evenly. "Though I'm curious why you're only concerned about my involvement now that the money's stopped flowing." David's face reddened. "This is petty, even for you. So you didn't get to walk her down the aisle. Get over it." "This isn't about the aisle, David. This is about being deliberately excluded from my daughter's wedding. A wedding I paid for almost entirely." "We had our reasons," Jason's father muttered. "Yes, avoiding conflict. Except there was never any conflict until you created one today." David stepped closer. "Fix the payments now, or so help me." "Or what?" John's voice remained calm. "You've already taken everything that matters. My relationship with my daughter. My role in her wedding. What else could you possibly take?" "This is exactly why Emily didn't want you there," David shouted. "Always making everything about you, your feelings, your money." Jason's father grabbed David's arm. "Not now," he hissed. "We need him to release the funds before the whole thing collapses." "We need his signature more than we need his feelings hurt," David snapped back, not realizing his volume. John went very still. "Signature for what?" The two men exchanged alarmed glances. "Nothing," Jason's father said quickly. "He's confused." But understanding was already dawning on John's face. "This was never about conflict. You needed me excluded, but financially committed. Why? What loan am I supposedly co-signing?" David's expression confirmed everything before he could deny it. "Get off my car," John said quietly. "I think I need to do some research. The loan, the signature, the deliberate exclusion." The pieces tumbled in John's mind as he drove home from the ruined reception, determined to uncover the truth. In his home office, he booted up his computer and began methodically searching through emails and text messages. Financial discussions with Emily had always been one-sided. His offers, her acceptances, rarely questions or explanations. Now, viewed through a new lens, the pattern was unmistakable. A call to his longtime banker, Mike, provided the missing piece. "Sorry to bother you after hours," John apologized. "Not a problem. The wedding go well?" John ignored the question. "Has anyone inquired about my financial status recently? Credit checks, loan eligibility, anything like that?" A pause. "Actually, yes. There was a business loan application last week listing you as co-signer. I assumed you knew." "What business?" John's voice remained steady, despite his pounding heart. "Some restaurant venture. Your daughter and son-in-law's names were on it as primary borrowers, with you as guarantor. Over $600,000. Was my signature on anything? Not yet. The paperwork was pending final approval next week. We'd need your in-person signature then." Mike hesitated. "John, are you saying you didn't authorize this?" "No, I didn't." John took a deep breath. "And what happens if I don't sign?" "With their financial history and lack of collateral, the loan would be denied." After thanking Mike and ending the call, John sat motionless. The plan became crystal clear. Exclude him from the wedding, but keep him financially committed. then present the loan documents afterward when his guilt over ruining Emily's reception would make refusal impossible. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was calculated, coordinated, and cold-blooded. In the silence of his office, John whispered, "They never wanted me there. They wanted my signature." John pulled out the bottom drawer of his desk, the one containing years of financial records. The evidence of a lifetime pattern spilled before him. Emily's college tuition payments, despite her rarely calling home. The down payment for her first apartment, met with complaints it wasn't in a better neighborhood. The car he'd purchased after her fender bender, which she'd later sold without telling him. Each gift, each payment, each bailout had been accepted without gratitude and followed by increasingly larger requests. And he had complied every time, telling himself, "That's what fathers did." His gaze fell on the framed photo of 8-year-old Emily on his shoulders, the same one from his dresser. Beside it sat the handmade Father's Day card she'd given him that same year. "I love you more than the whole sky," she'd written in childish script. When had that child become the woman who could plan his exclusion from her wedding while plotting to use him for loan collateral? More importantly, when had he become the man who allowed it? John recalled his late wife's gentle warnings years ago. "You can't buy Emily's love, John. You're teaching her to value you only for what you provide." He'd dismissed Margaret's concerns, insisting Emily would outgrow her materialism. Instead, he'd enabled its evolution into something far worse. The truth settled over him with crushing weight. He wasn't just the victim of today's betrayal. He had been its architect through years of boundless giving without boundaries. "I thought I was showing love," he whispered to the empty room. "But I was teaching exploitation." For the first time that day, John allowed himself to weep. Dawn filtered through John's kitchen window as he sat with his third cup of coffee, watching light gradually reclaim his garden. He hadn't slept. The night had been spent in soul-searching that left him emotionally exhausted, yet strangely clear-headed. What did he owe his daughter? What did he owe himself? These questions had circled throughout the dark hours, finally distilling into something simpler. What would true love do now? Not the enabling love he'd practiced for decades. Not vengeful punishment born of hurt, but love with truth. Love with boundaries. Love that wanted the best for Emily and for himself. The first rays of sunlight caught the edge of Margaret's rose bushes outside the window. She'd planted them the year before her diagnosis, telling him they'd need care but would be worth the effort. Like relationships, she'd said. John had dutifully pruned them every year since, cutting away the dead growth so new buds could flourish. The metaphor wasn't lost on him now. Some things needed cutting back to grow properly. His phone buzzed with messages, Emily, Jason, David, all demanding he fix what he'd done, all noticeably avoiding any acknowledgement of their scheme or apology for his exclusion. "I forgive you," he whispered, not to the messages, but to the people behind them. And somehow he meant it. The anger that had driven his actions at the reception had transformed during the night into something calmer, more resolute. He also realized, with startling clarity, that forgiveness didn't mean restoring the old pattern. True forgiveness meant freedom, for them from his enabling, for himself from their exploitation. John rose and opened the window, letting fresh morning air fill the kitchen. For the first time since being turned away at the wedding gate, he felt something like peace. It was time to speak the truth. All of it. John transformed his dining room table into a command center, systematically arranging financial records in chronological order. Bank statements, credit card bills, email confirmations, and text exchanges, each piece of evidence meticulously labeled and categorized. The wedding expenses alone filled a dedicated folder: venue deposits, catering installments, floral arrangements, photographer payments, $48,000 in total. But this was merely the latest chapter in a much longer financial story. College tuition, $126,000. First apartment security deposit and furnishings, $14,800. 3 car payments over the years, $72,300. Emergency loans never repaid, $31,500. The spreadsheet John created tallied over $290,000 in direct financial support to Emily since her 18th birthday. "My God!" came a voice from the doorway. John looked up to see his friend Robert, who he'd called earlier for moral support. Robert surveyed the documentation with wide eyes. "This is comprehensive." 13 years of financial records, John replied, his voice steady as he continued organizing. "And this doesn't include gifts, holidays, or smaller expenses." Robert picked up the loan application John had obtained from his banker. $600,000 for a restaurant? With their credit history, they couldn't qualify without you. John nodded, highlighting a section of the document. The co-signer would be responsible for the entire amount if they defaulted, which, given their history, was practically guaranteed. He placed the final document, the wedding security photo with "Do Not Admit" emblazoned across his face, at the center of the table, then stepped back to survey the evidence. "What now?" Robert asked. John's expression remained calm, resolute. "Now I tell the truth, not to hurt them, but because it's time everyone understood what actually happened." He gestured at the arranged documents. The facts speak for themselves. The anger that had driven his initial response was gone. In its place stood something stronger: clarity. As evening fell, John paused in his methodical preparation. He stood in the doorway between his dining room and living room, literally at a threshold, a physical boundary between spaces that suddenly seemed symbolic. On the table behind him lay the evidence of decades spent trying to purchase his daughter's love. Before him stretched empty rooms that had rarely heard Emily's voice in recent years, despite his constant financial presence in her life. John remembered the day Emily had called, breathless with excitement, about finding her dream venue for the wedding. He'd immediately offered to pay the deposit before even asking the cost. When the final contract came, he'd signed without question. Had she ever actually invited him to be part of the celebration, or had he simply assumed his financial contribution guaranteed his welcome? The troubling answer was neither absolved her calculated exclusion nor excused his enabling. "I always thought giving without limits was love," he whispered to the empty room. "But real love has boundaries. I failed her by never setting any." By fulfilling every request without question, he'd taught Emily that his value lay in his wallet, not his presence. By allowing himself to be used repeatedly, he'd participated in creating the very dynamic that culminated in his wedding exclusion. The realization didn't diminish the pain of betrayal, but it shifted something fundamental in his understanding. He couldn't change Emily, but he could change himself. Setting the boundary now wasn't punishment, it was correction, perhaps years too late, but necessary nonetheless. "No more," John said firmly, returning to the dining room with renewed purpose. Morning sunlight streamed through the community center windows as John arranged his documents on a table near the entrance. The monthly neighborhood association meeting would begin in 20 minutes, the perfect forum for his purpose. At most of the wedding guests were local residents who'd witnessed the aftermath of his exclusion without understanding its context. "Are you sure about this?" Robert asked, helping organize the display. "I'm not doing this for revenge," John replied, straightening a stack of photocopied financial records. "But when people ask why I ruined Emily's wedding, they deserve the actual story." He'd carefully curated the evidence, removing anything unnecessarily embarrassing while maintaining the essential truth: the pattern of financial dependence, the wedding exclusion despite his complete funding, and the pending loan scheme that explained it all. As neighbors began arriving, many greeted John warmly but with obvious curiosity. Some had been at the wedding, others had heard conflicting accounts. "John, I've been meaning to call," said Margaret Wilson, the association president. "There are some concerns about what happened at Emily's wedding." "That's why I'm here," John replied calmly. "I'd like a few minutes during the meeting to clarify the situation." When his turn came, John stood without anger or defensiveness. "Many of you witnessed or heard about my absence from my daughter's wedding last weekend. I'd like to provide context for what actually occurred." His presentation was measured, factual, and mercifully brief. He explained the exclusion, the financial history, and the loan scheme without embellishment or accusation. "I'm not here to villainize my daughter or her new family," he concluded. "I simply want the truth understood. I continue to wish them well, but from a necessary distance." As he finished speaking, the room remained silent for several moments before Margaret responded. "Thank you for your honesty, John," she said quietly. "That couldn't have been easy." John nodded, surprised by the lightness he felt. The truth, once spoken, had set something free within him. John barely made it to his car before his phone began ringing. Emily's name flashed on the screen, the first direct contact since the wedding. He let it go to voicemail, then watched as text messages flooded in. "How could you?" Followed by, "You've humiliated us in front of everyone." Before he could process this, Robert caught up to him in the parking lot. "That went better than expected," Robert said. "Margaret Wilson's on your side, and she's an influencer in this community." "It wasn't about taking sides," John replied, pocketing his vibrating phone. "Well, sides are being taken. The Hendersons think you should have kept family business private. The Whitakers said they always wondered why Emily never visited. It's divided." A black SUV screeched into the lot, Jason's father, red-faced and thundering toward them. "You miserable old man!" he shouted, drawing stares from departing community members. "You think airing dirty laundry makes you look good? You've ruined their reputation." John maintained his composure. "I shared facts, George. If the truth damages their reputation, that's not my doing. You had no right. I had every right to correct the narrative that I maliciously ruined a wedding I wasn't welcome at." George stepped closer, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. "Emily's devastated. Is that what you wanted? To hurt your own daughter?" "No," John answered calmly. "I wanted people to understand what actually happened. You'll retract everything, publicly." "I won't." George's eyes narrowed. "This isn't over." As he stormed away, several neighbors approached John cautiously. "Are you all right?" asked Mrs. Chen, who lived 2 doors down. That was quite a scene. "I'm fine," John assured her, surprised by her concern. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I think you showed remarkable restraint, both now and in your presentation." Her unexpected support steadied him as his phone continued to vibrate with incoming messages. The doorbell rang the following afternoon. John opened it to find Emily standing on his porch, her eyes red-rimmed, but her posture carefully composed. It was the first time he'd seen her since before the wedding. "May I come in?" Her voice was soft, vulnerable, a tone he'd heard many times before major financial requests. John hesitated, then stepped aside. She chose the living room sofa, her childhood spot for difficult conversations. "Dad," she began, voice trembling, "how could you embarrass us like that?" "I told the truth, Emily." "Your version of it," she countered, tears welling. "You've always been so generous. I never thought you were keeping score." John noted the subtle shift, framing his record-keeping as pettiness rather than evidence. "This isn't about the money," he said quietly. "Then why publicly humiliate me?" "On the hardest week of my life?" "The hardest week of your life was one you deliberately excluded me from." Emily's expression shifted, tears receding as she changed tactics. "Mom would be so disappointed in you." The familiar manipulation stung, but differently now that John recognized it. "Your mother," he said carefully, "warned me that my unconditional financial support without boundaries would harm you." Emily's facade cracked slightly before she tried again. "Jason and I are devastated. His parents think I come from a dysfunctional family now." "Emily," John said gently but firmly, "what was the loan for?" Her eyes widened briefly before narrowing. "Is that what this is about? You're punishing me because we wanted to start a business?" "No. I'm declining to sign for a loan you plan to secure through manipulation rather than asking directly." She stood abruptly. "I always knew you didn't really love me." John didn't rise to the bait. "I've always loved you, Emily. I just won't enable you anymore." The local coffee shop fell silent when John entered 3 days later. Conversations paused, then resumed in hushed tones. He ordered his usual and took a seat by the window, aware of the occasional glance his way. Sandra Miller, who sang in the community choir with him, was the first to approach. "People are talking," she said, sliding into the chair opposite him. "I imagine they are. Some think you should have kept quiet, that family matters should stay private." "And you?" Sandra considered. "I raised 3 children as a single mother. My oldest tried the same financial manipulation for years. It only stopped when I finally said no." Her unexpected understanding made John smile. "How is he now?" "On his own 2 feet. Our relationship actually improved once I stopped being an ATM." She patted his hand. "It takes courage to change the dance." As if her approach had broken a barrier, others began stopping by his table. Tom Jenkins suggested John should forgive and forget. Rebecca from the garden club shared how her sister hadn't spoken to her in 15 years over a similar boundary. Pastor Williams offered well-meaning platitudes about reconciliation. "Everyone has an opinion," Robert observed, joining him later. "And they're all certain they're right," John replied. "Are you still certain?" John watched the diverse community moving through the shop. "Yes, the truth was necessary, even if it's uncomfortable." As they prepared to leave, John's phone rang. The screen displayed David's number, Emily's uncle, and his ex-brother-in-law. "John, we need to talk," David said when John answered. "Emily and Jason are struggling. The restaurant opportunity will fall through without that loan." His voice softened, conciliatory. "Look, everyone acknowledges mistakes were made. Emily's prepared to apologize for the wedding situation. Can we meet to discuss how to move forward?" "For family's sake?" John gripped the phone tightly, recognizing the familiar pattern disguised as reconciliation. The restaurant David chose was upscale but secluded, a private dining room that ensured their conversation wouldn't be overheard. John arrived to find Emily, Jason, and David already seated, a folder of documents conspicuously placed at the center of the table. "Thank you for coming," David began, his tone carefully measured. "We all recognize things have gone sideways recently." Emily sat with hands folded, eyes downcast in a posture of contrition John had seen many times before, usually preceding requests for car repairs or rent assistance. "Dad," she said softly, "I want to apologize for how everything happened with the wedding. It was wrong to exclude you, especially after all you'd done." Jason nodded vigorously. "Sir, we were caught up in wedding stress and family politics." "It wasn't right." John studied them silently, noting how their apologies acknowledged the action but carefully avoided mentioning their actual motivation. "And the loan application?" he asked. David smoothly slid the folder forward. "We should discuss that, yes. The opportunity is extraordinary, a restaurant space in the new downtown development, but time is of the essence. The bank needs a co-signer by Friday." "It's my dream, Dad," Emily added, emotion returning to her voice. "I've wanted this since culinary school." "We've reworked the numbers," Jason explained. "The restaurant consultant projects 20% returns in the first year." "And if it fails?" John asked quietly. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. "That's why we need a co-signer," David admitted. "But with your support, failure isn't an option." Emily reached across the table, touching John's hand. "I know things between us haven't been perfect, but this could be a fresh start. We can rebuild while building something amazing." John noticed how skillfully they'd combined their apology with the financial request, as if resolving one naturally meant approving the other. "I need a moment," he said finally, rising from the table. "Excuse me?" In the restaurant's quiet corridor, John gathered his thoughts. Through the dining room's glass panel, he could see them waiting. Emily fidgeting nervously, Jason checking his watch, David reorganizing the loan documents. Their body language told the true story. This meeting was about the loan, not reconciliation. When John returned to the table, his expression was calm but resolute. "I've listened carefully," he began, "and I want to be clear about my response." They leaned forward expectantly. "I forgive you for excluding me from the wedding. Truly." His voice was genuine, without bitterness. "That chapter is closed for me." Relief flickered across their faces, followed by anticipation for what they clearly assumed would come next: his agreement to the loan. "As for the restaurant venture," John continued, "I will not be co-signing the loan." The atmosphere transformed instantly. Emily's mouth opened in shock, while Jason's face flushed red. "But you just said you forgive us," Emily protested. "I do forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean I must resume financial support." "This is punishment," Jason accused. "No," John replied steadily. "This is a boundary. I'm ending a pattern where my value to this family has been measured by my financial contributions." "Dad, please." "Emily," John's voice softened. "I love you. I always will. But I won't enable behavior that damages both of us. If you want a relationship with me, it needs to be based on genuine connection, not financial dependence." David attempted intervention. "John, perhaps we can discuss alternative arrangements." "There's nothing to negotiate," John said firmly. "My financial involvement in your lives is over. My door remains open for a relationship, but one based on mutual respect, not transactions." Emily pushed back from the table, tears of frustration replacing her earlier contrition. "Then there's nothing left to talk about." "That," John said quietly, "is entirely your choice." John walked out of the restaurant into the warm evening air, each step feeling lighter than the last. Behind him, through the window, he could see the heated discussion continuing without him, probably searching for another financial solution, another person to approach. For the first time in years, it wasn't his problem to solve. A text from Robert arrived. "How did it go?" John smiled, typing simply, "Boundaries established. I'm good." As he reached his car, he noticed an elderly couple struggling with a map near the restaurant entrance. On impulse, he approached them. "Can I help you find something?" The woman looked up with relief. "We're trying to locate the community garden our daughter mentioned. Apparently, there's a beautiful rose section." "Margaret's garden," John said, surprising himself with the lack of pain in mentioning his late wife's namesake. "I help maintain it, actually. It's about 3 blocks east." "Would you mind showing us?" the gentleman asked. "I'm Howard. This is Elaine. We're new to town, just moved to be closer to our grandchildren." "I'm John, and I'd be happy to." As they walked, John found himself describing the community projects he'd been contemplating, expanding the garden program, mentoring at the youth center. Dreams he'd postponed while pouring resources into Emily's demands. "You should join our senior volunteer group," Elaine suggested. "We're just getting started ourselves." "I might do that," John replied, realizing he meant it. Ahead, the garden waited in the golden evening light, roses in full bloom. Behind him lay a boundary firmly established. Before him stretched possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to imagine. For the first time in years, John walked toward his own future. 1 year had passed since John Matthews had stood his ground in that restaurant, speaking words that changed everything. Now, on a crisp autumn morning, he knelt in Margaret's garden, carefully pruning the season's last roses, a ritual that had taken on new meaning. "Those white ones are spectacular," observed Howard, who had become a regular gardening companion. "What's your secret?" John smiled. "Knowing when to cut back so new growth can flourish." The metaphor wasn't lost on either of them. In the year since establishing his boundary with Emily, John had discovered an unexpected truth. Sometimes the most generous act is refusing to give what harms. There had been no dramatic reconciliation with his daughter. 3 months after their final conversation, she'd sent a terse birthday card. He'd responded with a warm note expressing love without financial offers. Small steps, neither rushed nor forced. What had grown abundantly, however, was John's life beyond that defining relationship. The senior volunteer group had become family of choice. The youth mentoring program he'd established had given purpose to his wisdom. "Did I tell you Emily called yesterday?" John said, brushing soil from his hands. "Just checking in. No requests, no agenda." Howard nodded, understanding the significance. "Progress." "Slow, but real," John agreed. "I've learned that dignity isn't something others can take unless you surrender it, and that boundaries aren't walls. They're the foundation of any healthy relationship." As they gathered their tools, John reflected on his journey. The pain of exclusion had transformed into the peace of self-respect. The humiliation had become a catalyst for authentic living. "The strangest part," John said, gazing across the garden where new volunteers were planting bulbs for spring, "is realizing that by saying no to what drained me, I finally had the strength to say yes to what nourishes me." He had discovered that true generosity flows not from empty obligation, but from genuine connection, and that some relationships need winter's pruning before spring's renewal becomes possible.